The human empire sent its youngest captain into alien space. He returned with their flagship. The council chamber of the human empire was cold, even though the air recyclers kept the temperature at a steady 21 degrees. Captain Ethan Cole stood at the center of the round room, his boots planted on the black floor, his hands behind his back. 12 old admirals sat above him in a circle of high chairs, looking down like judges in a court. He was 26 years old. He was the youngest captain in the history of the human fleet. And right now, every single person in that room wanted him to fail. "You understand the mission," said Admiral Voss, the oldest man in the chamber. His voice was rough, like gravel dragged across metal. "You will take the scout ship, Wayfinder, and cross the border into Scarn space. You will gather information on their fleet movements, their weapons, their numbers. You will not engage, you will not be seen, and you will return within 30 days. "Yes, sir," Ethan said. "You also understand," Voss continued, "that no ship we have sent into that region in the last 5 years has come back." The room went quiet. A few of the admirals shifted in their seats. One of them, a woman named Admiral Reyes, looked at Ethan with something close to pity. "I understand, sir," Ethan said. His voice did not shake. Voss studied him for a long moment. "Then why are you smiling, Captain?" Ethan had not realized he was smiling until the Admiral pointed it out. He thought about it for a second, then answered honestly. "Because someone has to go, sir, and I would rather it be someone who wants to come back than someone who has already given up." A murmur passed through the chamber. Admiral Reyes almost smiled herself, but she caught it and hid it behind her hand. Voss did not smile. "Dismissed, Captain. You leave at dawn." The human empire had been at war with the Scarn Dominion for 11 years. It was not a war of endless battles. It was a war of silence, broken every few months by a sudden, terrible strike. The Scarn were an old species, older than humanity by thousands of years. Their ships were built from a strange black metal that absorbed sensor waves, making them almost invisible until they were close enough to fire. Their soldiers were tall, thin, and covered in natural armor plates that could stop a standard human rifle round. Nobody in the human empire had ever captured a live Scarn soldier. Nobody had ever set foot on a Scarn ship and lived to describe it in detail. What humanity did know came from broken pieces. A destroyed human outpost here, a damaged Scarn drone there, fragments of data pulled from dead sensors. From these pieces, the Empire's scientists had built a picture of an enemy that was patient, disciplined, and utterly convinced of its own superiority. The Scarn did not send messages, they did not negotiate, they simply took what they wanted and destroyed what they did not. Captain Ethan Cole had grown up hearing stories about the Scarn, the way children on old Earth once heard stories about monsters under the bed. He had lost his older brother, Marcus, in a Scarn raid on the mining colony of Perch Station when he was 14 years old. Marcus had been a maintenance engineer, not a soldier, and he had never even seen the enemy that killed him. That was the thing about the Scarn. They came, they killed, and they left, and the people left behind never even got to see the face of what took their loved ones. Ethan had joined the Fleet Academy 2 years after that, at the earliest age they allowed. He had graduated top of his class in tactics and gunnery, but what set him apart was something the instructors could not put on a test score. He noticed things. He noticed the way enemy ships moved in patterns, the way pilots hesitated before certain maneuvers, the small gaps in a defense that everyone else looked past because they were staring at the big picture. His mentor, an old war captain named Dorian Blake, used to say that Ethan had a mind that sees the cracks in the wall instead of the wall itself. That skill had gotten him promoted faster than anyone expected. It had also gotten him this mission, the kind of mission given to a captain the Empire could afford to lose. Ethan knew that. He was not foolish. He understood that half the admirals in that chamber believed he would never come back, and that they had chosen him partly because he was young and unproven, and partly because if the mission failed, it would be easier to explain the loss of one small ship and one young captain than the loss of a veteran and a larger crew. He understood all of this, and he had accepted the mission anyway. Because somebody had to go, and because Ethan Cole had spent 12 years wanting to look the enemy that killed his brother in the eye, even if that eye was made of black metal and cold light. Wayfinder was a small ship, built for speed and stealth rather than firepower. It carried a crew of 11, all volunteers, all people who had looked at the mission briefing and said yes anyway. Ethan had chosen each of them himself. His first officer was a woman named Priya Anand, 31 years old, sharp-tongued and calm under pressure. She had served on 3 different ships before the Wayfinder, and had survived 2 Skarn engagements, which made her the most experienced person on the crew when it came to actually facing the enemy. His chief engineer was a broad-shouldered man named Otto Berg, who had a habit of talking to the ship's engines like they were living things, and somehow always seemed to know exactly what was wrong with them before the diagnostics did. His sensor officer, a quiet young man named Kip Sato, had a talent for pulling clear signals out of noisy data, a skill that would matter more than anyone knew in the days ahead. The rest of the crew were engineers, pilots, and a single doctor, a stern older woman named Dr. Ewan, who had signed on because, as she put it, somebody needs to keep you all alive long enough to matter. They left Human Empire space at dawn, exactly as ordered. The border crossing point was a quiet stretch of empty space between 2 dead stars, marked only by a faint navigation beacon left behind by an old survey mission. Once they crossed that line, they would be alone. No support ships, no rescue fleet, no way to call for help that would arrive in time to matter. Last chance to turn back, Ethan said over the ship's comm as they approached the beacon. It was a joke, mostly. Nobody was going to turn back. Sir, with respect, Priya said from the seat beside him, if you turn this ship around now, I will personally throw you out the airlock and finish the mission myself. Ethan laughed, and for a moment, the tension in the bridge eased. Then the beacon passed beneath them, and the Wayfinder slipped quietly into Skarn space, and the laughter stopped. For the first 6 days, they saw nothing. The region of space just past the border was mostly empty, a scattering of dead systems and drifting debris fields left over from old battles. Ethan kept the ship running on minimal power, drifting more than flying, letting Kip's sensors do the work of watching without being watched. They mapped debris fields, they logged old wreckage, they found the burned-out hull of a Human Empire scout ship that had gone missing 3 years earlier, and Ethan made everyone stand in silence for a moment before they moved on. On the 7th day, Kip found something. Captain, I've got a contact. His voice was tight. Small craft, moving slow, about 2 light hours out. It's not moving like a warship. I think it might be a transport. Ethan leaned over the sensor display. The Skarn signature was faint, barely a shadow against the black metal that made their ship so hard to see. But it was there. Can you tell what it's carrying? Kip shook his head. Not from here. But it's alone. No escort. If we wanted a closer look at Skarn tech, this might be our only chance. Priya was already frowning. That's exactly why it might be a trap. Ethan thought about it. This was the moment Voss had warned him about. The moment where curiosity could get his entire crew killed. But it was also the moment he had trained for his whole life. The crack in the wall that everyone else would look past. Take us in slow, he said, silent running. If it's a trap, we run. If it's not. He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Everyone on the bridge understood. This was why they had come. The Wayfinder crept forward through the dark, engines nearly silent, sensors straining to see without being seen. And somewhere ahead of them, alone in the black, a Skarn ship drifted through space, carrying a secret that would change everything. None of them knew yet that this single, quiet decision, to follow a lonely ship into the dark instead of turning away, would be the first step on a path that would end with Ethan Cole standing on the bridge of the enemy's greatest warship, and the whole galaxy watching to see what a human captain would do next. But that was still days away. For now, there was only the dark, and the quiet hum of the engines, and 11 people holding their breath as they moved deeper into the space no human had ever returned from. The Wayfinder followed the lone Skarn ship for 11 hours, before Kip Sato finally spoke again. Captain, it's slowing down. I think it's approaching something. Ethan had not left the bridge since they started the pursuit. His eyes were tired, but his mind was sharp, running through every possible outcome of what they might find. Show me. The main screen flickered and shifted, showing a wider view of the sector ahead. At first there was only darkness. Then, slowly, shapes began to appear. faint outlines against the black, arranged in careful rows like ships in a dock. "That's a shipyard," Priya said quietly. "A hidden one." Ethan felt his stomach tighten. This was no longer a small discovery. This was the kind of intelligence that could change the entire war. A hidden Skarn shipyard, deep in territory no human had ever mapped, building ships far from human eyes. "Kip, how many vessels?" "Counting now. At least 40, Captain. Maybe more, hidden behind the debris ring. And..." Kip's voice trailed off, and his hands went still over the console. "And what?" Ethan asked. "There's something bigger in the center. Much bigger. I'm not even sure my instruments are reading it right." Ethan walked over and looked at the readings himself. The shape in the center of the shipyard was massive, larger than any warship the human empire had ever built. Its outline was hard to make out even at this range, wrapped in the same black material that made all Skarn ships difficult to detect, but the sheer size of it was impossible to hide completely. "That's a flagship," Priya said. "Has to be. Nothing else would need to be that big." Ethan stared at the screen for a long moment. Every instinct in his body told him to turn the Wayfinder around right now, transmit everything they had found back to Empire space, and let the fleet decide what to do with the information. That was the mission. Gather information. Do not engage. Return within 30 days. But something else was bothering him. Something that had been nagging at the back of his mind since they first spotted the lone transport ship. "Priya, why would they send a single, unescorted transport toward a shipyard this important? No warships nearby. No patrol formation. That doesn't fit anything we know about how the Skarn operate." Priya frowned, thinking it over. Unless it wasn't really unescorted. Unless we walked right into their patrol pattern without seeing it. The words had barely left her mouth when every alarm on the Wayfinder began to scream at once. 3 Skarn warships had appeared out of the dark, seemingly from nowhere, surrounding the Wayfinder on 3 sides. Their black hulls had been invisible against the void until the moment their weapons powered up, glowing faint red as targeting systems locked onto the small human ship. "Evasive maneuvers," Ethan shouted, and the pilot, a young woman named Pharaoh, threw the ship into a hard turn, even as the first shots came in. The Wayfinder shuddered violently as a beam clipped its shields, and warning lights lit up across every console on the bridge. "Shields down to 60%, Otto's voice crackled over the comm from engineering. "One more hit like that, and we lose them completely." Ethan's mind raced. Running was not an option. The Skarn ships were faster and had them surrounded. Fighting was not an option either. The Wayfinder carried light defensive weapons meant for escaping trouble, not winning battles against 3 warships. He needed a third option, and he needed it in the next few seconds. His eyes fell on the debris field they had been navigating through for the past day, the broken remains of old battles scattered like a graveyard across this stretch of space. "Pharaoh, take us into the debris field. Deepest part you can find, now." "Captain, that's incredibly risky. We could hit." "They're bigger than us," Ethan said. "Bigger ships, less room to maneuver. We're smaller. Use it." Pharaoh did not argue again. She threw the ship forward, weaving between broken hull fragments and drifting scrap metal, some pieces as large as buildings, others as small as a fist, but moving fast enough to punch through a hull. The Wayfinder rattled and groaned as it squeezed through gaps that should have been too narrow, Pharaoh's hands moving across the controls with a speed that bordered on impossible. Behind them, the 3 Skarn warships hesitated, then followed, but more cautiously, their larger hulls forced to slow down and pick careful paths through the wreckage. "We're gaining distance," Kip called out. "But Captain, they're not falling for it completely. 2 of them are trying to flank us through a different path." Ethan studied the debris field on the display, his mind working through the layout the way he used to study enemy formations in training. There, a narrow channel of clear space threading through the wreckage, barely wide enough for the Wayfinder, leading toward a denser cluster of debris beyond. "Pharaoh, hard turn, bearing 310, now." The ship spun and shot through the gap, and for a moment, the Skarn warships lost visual contact entirely, their sensors confused by the dense metal and old radiation readings scattered throughout the debris field. For almost a full minute, there was silence on the bridge, except for the hum of the engines and the sound of everyone breathing hard. Then Kip's voice broke the quiet. tight with tension. "Captain, I think we lost them." Nobody celebrated. Nobody moved. They all knew this was not over. They drifted in the shadow of a massive broken hull for almost 3 hours. Engines at minimum power. Every system dimmed to reduce their signature as much as possible. Dr. Ewan moved quietly through the ship, checking on the crew, most of whom sat in silence at their stations, waiting. Ethan used the time to think. He pulled up everything Kip had managed to record about the shipyard before the attack began. The rows of warships, the massive shape at the center that could only be a flagship. It was the kind of intelligence that could win or lose the entire war, and it was sitting right there in his ship's databanks. But there was a problem, and it was a serious one. Their long-range communication array had been damaged in the first exchange of fire. Otto had confirmed it 20 minutes ago. The array was not destroyed, but it needed at least 6 hours of repair work before it could send a message strong enough to reach Empire space from this distance. And they were not exactly in a position to sit still for 6 hours, with 3 Skarn warships hunting for them. "We could try to run for the border," Priya suggested during a quiet moment on the bridge, her voice low so the rest of the crew would not overhear the discussion. "Get far enough that Otto can fix the array while we're moving. It's risky, but staying here is worse." Ethan nodded slowly, but something else was turning in his mind, something that felt reckless, even as he considered it. "What if we don't run yet?" Priya's eyebrows rose. "Captain, we barely survived the last engagement. I'm not sure I like where this is going." "That shipyard is still out there," Ethan said. "And they don't know exactly where we are right now. If we could get even one clean sensor sweep of that flagship before we run, it would be worth 10 times more to the fleet than what we already have. And if we get caught doing it, then we run for the border and pray Otto gets that array fixed in time." Priya studied him for a long moment, the way she had studied plenty of captains before him, weighing whether this one was brave or simply foolish. Whatever she saw in his face, it seemed to satisfy her, because she finally nodded. "You're either going to get us all killed, Captain, or you're going to end this war. I genuinely don't know which yet." "Neither do I," Ethan admitted. "But I'd rather find out than wonder for the rest of my life." They approached the shipyard from a different angle this time, moving through a wide arc of empty space that kept them well outside the range of the automated defenses Kip had detected on his first pass. It took nearly 4 hours of careful, silent maneuvering, but eventually the Wayfinder settled into position at the very edge of sensor range, close enough to get a clear reading, far enough to have a chance of running if things went wrong. What they saw confirmed everything and more. The flagship sitting at the center of the shipyard was enormous, easily 3 times the size of the largest ship in the entire human Empire fleet. Its surface was covered in weapon emplacements, shield generators, and a strange array of technology that Kip could not identify no matter how many scans he ran. "Captain," Kip said, his voice hushed with something close to awe, "this ship alone could probably fight our entire home fleet and win." Ethan stared at the image on the screen, and instead of fear, he felt something else stirring in his chest, a strange, sharp curiosity, the same feeling he used to get as a cadet staring at a tactical puzzle nobody else could solve. "Get me everything you can on its shield frequency, its engine layout, anything at all," he said. "We may only get one chance at this." What none of them knew yet, not Ethan, not Priya, not anyone on that quiet drifting ship, was that this massive vessel sitting silently in the dark would one day fly under a human flag, carrying the name of a young captain who was not supposed to survive his first mission into enemy space. But that future was still built on choices, and the next choice they made was about to go terribly wrong. The alarm came without warning. One moment, Kip was quietly recording sensor data on the massive flagship, the numbers scrolling across his screen faster than he could read them. The next moment, every light on the Wayfinder turned red, and a new contact appeared on the display, so close it made Ethan's blood run cold. "Skarn patrol craft, right on top of us," Kip shouted. "They must have had a passive sensor net around the shipyard we didn't detect." "Get us out, now," Ethan ordered, but it was already too late. A tractor beam of dark energy shot out from the patrol craft and locked onto the Wayfinder's hull, dragging the smaller ship forward, even as Pharaoh threw the engines into full reverse. "I can't break free," Pharaoh yelled, sweat beading on her forehead. "That beam is too strong." Otto's voice crackled over the comm. tense and fast. "Captain, if I overload the engines, I might generate enough of a power surge to disrupt the beam, but it'll fry half our systems in the process." "Do it," Ethan shouted. The ship shuddered violently as Otto forced the engines past their safety limits. Sparks flew from several consoles on the bridge, and for one terrifying second, the lights flickered and died completely. Then, with a final groan of stressed metal, the tractor beam snapped, and the Wayfinder shot backward, tumbling away from the patrol craft. "We're free," Pharaoh called out, already fighting to stabilize the ship's spin. But their freedom did not last long. Warning lights flashed across the sensor display as more Skarn ships emerged from the shipyard, alerted by the failed capture attempt. Within minutes, 5 warships were converging on their position, cutting off every clear path back toward the border. "Captain, we are not getting out of this the way we came in," Priya said grimly, watching the enemy formation tighten around them like a closing fist. Ethan's mind raced through every option and found almost none of them good. Running was impossible with 5 ships converging from multiple directions. Fighting was suicide against that many warships, and their long-range communication array was still hours away from being fully repaired. Then his eyes landed on something on the tactical display, something that gave him a desperate, half-formed idea. "The debris field," he said. "The same one we used before. If we can reach it and hide deep enough inside, they'll have to send ships in after us one at a time. That's our only chance to even the odds." "Even the odds against warships 100 times our size?" Priya asked, disbelief in her voice. "I didn't say it was a good chance," Ethan admitted. "I said it was our only one." The chase through the debris field was worse than the first time. The Skarn ships had learned from their earlier mistake, sending smaller, faster patrol craft into the wreckage after the Wayfinder, while the larger warships waited at the edges, cutting off any escape route. Pharaoh flew with a kind of desperate skill that Ethan had never seen from her before, weaving the ship through gaps that seemed impossibly narrow, dodging debris that would have crushed them instantly. But it was not enough. A Skarn patrol craft managed to land a direct hit on the Wayfinder's rear section, and the ship lurched violently as an explosion tore through the aft compartment. "We've lost engine 2, Otto shouted. "I'm reading a hull breach on deck 3. "Seal it off," Ethan ordered. "Dr. Ewan, report." There was a pause, longer than Ethan liked, before the doctor's voice came back, strained. 2 crew members injured in the breach. Nothing fatal, but they're out of action. Ethan felt the weight of every decision he had made pressing down on him at once. This was exactly what Voss had warned him about. This was exactly why nobody expected him to come back. And yet, even now, some stubborn part of him refused to accept that this was how it ended. "Captain," Priya said quietly, "we need a plan, and we need it now, because we are not going to survive many more hits like that one." Ethan looked at the tactical display, at the wreckage surrounding them, at the enemy ships slowly tightening their circle. And then his eyes fell on something he had almost missed, a massive piece of debris near the center of the field, far larger than anything else around it, its interior hollowed out and dark. "That's not just wreckage," he said slowly. "That's the hull of a ship. A big one." Kip ran a quick scan. "Captain, you're right. It looks like an old Skarn cruiser, destroyed a long time ago. Most of the internal systems are dead, but the hull is mostly intact." An idea began to form in Ethan's mind, wild and desperate, the kind of plan that only made sense when every other option had already failed. "Pharaoh, get us inside that wreck, all the way inside." "Inside a destroyed enemy ship? Captain, if there's any power left in that hull at all, we could be flying straight into a trap." "We're already in a trap," Ethan said. "I'd rather be inside a trap they don't expect than out here waiting for them to close in." The interior of the dead cruiser was dark and silent, lit only by the dim emergency lights of the Wayfinder, as Pharaoh guided the small ship through a massive breach in the wrecked hull. The corridors of the destroyed ship stretched out around them, twisted metal and broken machinery frozen in the exact positions they had been left in, whatever battle had killed this vessel years ago. Once inside, Pharaoh cut the engines completely, letting the Wayfinder drift silently in the dark belly of the dead ship. Outside, they could hear the faint vibrations of Skarn patrol craft searching the debris field, their sensors sweeping back and forth, hunting for a target that had seemingly vanished. For nearly an hour, nobody on the bridge spoke above a whisper. Dr. Ewan tended to the injured crew members in near silence. Otto worked quietly on emergency repairs, using only hand tools to avoid making any sound that might carry through the hull. Ethan sat in the captain's chair, staring at the dark corridors of the dead ship stretching out beyond the Wayfinder's viewport, and thought about what to do next. It was Kip who broke the silence, his voice barely above a breath. "Captain, I'm picking up something strange." Ethan turned toward him immediately. "What kind of strange?" "There's still a small amount of residual power in this wreck. Not much, but enough that some of the old data systems might still be intact. If I could tap into it safely, we might be able to pull information about Skarn ship design straight from their own records. Weapons, shields, even things about that flagship we saw." Ethan felt a spark of the same curiosity that had gotten them into this situation in the first place. "Can you do it without alerting anyone outside?" "I think so. It would take time, but the system looks isolated from any active network." Ethan glanced at Priya, who gave a small, resigned shrug. "We're already hiding inside a dead enemy ship, Captain. I don't think this makes things much worse." "Do it," Ethan said, quietly. What Kip found over the next several hours changed everything. Buried deep in the old cruiser's isolated data core were fragments of information about Skarn shipbuilding, their command structure, and, most importantly, detailed information about the very flagship sitting in the shipyard outside. According to the records, the flagship was called the Vengeance of Thresh, and it was not simply the largest ship in the Skarn fleet. It was meant to be a symbol, a warning to every species that dared oppose the Dominion, a floating fortress built to be the pride of their entire military. But buried within the technical schematics was something else, something that made Ethan sit up straight in his chair, a flaw, a weakness in the flagship's shield generator array, a design oversight that had apparently been noted by Skarn engineers themselves but never fully corrected, because no enemy had ever come close enough to exploit it. "This is incredible," Kip whispered, scrolling through the data with wide eyes. "If this information is accurate, there's a narrow window during shield rotation cycles where a very specific frequency could disrupt the entire array. It would only last a few seconds, but during that time, the flagship's main shields would be down." Priya leaned over to look at the data herself, her expression unreadable. "Even if that's true, what good does it do us? We have a damaged scout ship with 2 people injured, and a hull breach we're still repairing. We can't exactly fly up to a flagship and shoot it during a few seconds of weakness." "No," Ethan said slowly, an idea beginning to take shape in his mind, wild and dangerous, and utterly unlike anything the Empire's admirals would have approved. "But it means that ship isn't invincible. It means there's a crack in the wall." He looked around at his crew, tired, injured, trapped deep inside enemy territory, with an enemy fleet hunting for them just beyond the hull of a dead ship. And yet, for the first time since the chase began, he felt something other than fear. He felt possibility. "We're not running for the border yet," he said quietly. "Not until I figure out exactly what we're going to do with this." Nobody on the bridge argued, though every one of them understood exactly how dangerous that decision truly was. Outside, in the darkness of the debris field, the hunt for the Wayfinder continued, and somewhere at the center of that hidden shipyard, the Vengeance of Thresh sat unaware that a small, wounded human ship had just discovered the one weakness that could bring it down. The plan Ethan came up with over the next 12 hours was, by any reasonable measure, insane. He knew it. Priya knew it. Even Otto, who tended to trust Ethan's instincts more than most, looked at him like he had lost his mind when he first explained it. "You want to board the flagship," Priya repeated slowly, as if saying it out loud might reveal how impossible it sounded. "The largest warship in the Skarn Dominion, the one sitting in the middle of a shipyard, surrounded by 40 other vessels, and an unknown number of patrol craft, actively hunting for us." "Not the whole crew," Ethan clarified. "Just a small team. In and out, fast, before anyone even realizes we're aboard." "And what exactly do you plan to do once you're on this warship, Captain? Politely ask them to surrender?" Ethan allowed himself a small, tired smile. "I want to disable the shield generator, using the frequency Kip found. If we can get close enough during a shield rotation cycle, drop the shields even for a few seconds, we could plant a device deep inside the ship that would let us access their systems directly, instead of guessing from the outside." And you think we can just walk onto an enemy flagship without being noticed? Not walk on, Ethan said. Fly in. There's a maintenance bay near the base of the ship, according to the schematics Kip pulled. It's meant for small repair drones, not full-size ships, but a shuttle might just fit if we're careful. Otto, who had been listening quietly from the doorway of the bridge, finally spoke up. Captain, even if all of that works exactly as planned, you're talking about a boarding team walking through a ship built for a species we know almost nothing about, with technology we don't understand, hoping to find and disable systems we've never seen in person. That's not a plan. That's a prayer with extra steps. Then it's a good thing, Ethan said, that I don't need it to be perfect. I just need it to work long enough. Assembling the boarding team took careful thought. Ethan chose 5 people beyond himself. Priya, whose combat experience made her essential. Otto, whose technical knowledge would be needed to interface with unfamiliar systems. Kip, who understood the data they had already gathered better than anyone. And 2 of the ship's security officers, Reyes and Tull, chosen for their steady nerves under pressure. Dr. Yuen would stay behind with the Wayfinder, tending to the 2 injured crew members and keeping the ship ready for a quick departure the moment the boarding team returned. Pharaoh would remain at the controls, ready to fly them out the instant they were back aboard, or to attempt a desperate rescue if things went wrong. They left the safety of the dead cruiser's hull just after the ship's internal clock marked what would have been midnight back in Human Empire space. The debris field was quieter now, most of the Skarn patrol craft having widened their search pattern outward, assuming the Wayfinder had fled deeper into the wreckage, rather than staying hidden this close to the shipyard itself. The small boarding shuttle detached from the Wayfinder silently, drifting on minimal power toward the looming shape of the Vengeance of Thresh. Up close, the flagship was even more massive than the sensor readings had suggested, its black hull stretching out in every direction like a mountain floating in the void, dotted with faint lights and the slow-moving shapes of automated defense turrets. Shield rotation cycle in 90 seconds, Kip whispered over the comm, watching the readings on his portable scanner. If Otto's calculations are right, we'll have a window of about 11 seconds where the shields drop entirely. 11 seconds to get an entire shuttle through a gap meant for repair drones, Priya muttered. No pressure. Pharaoh, piloting the shuttle with the same steady focus she had shown throughout the entire mission, guided them into position just outside the maintenance bay, waiting with her hands steady on the controls. The seconds ticked by, in tense silence. Window opening, Kip said. 3, 2, 1, now. Pharaoh shot the shuttle forward the instant the shields dropped, threading through the narrow maintenance bay opening, with barely a few meters of clearance on either side. The shuttle scraped against the edge of the opening, sparks flying, but it made it through, sliding into the dim interior of the flagship's maintenance bay, just as the shields flickered back to life behind them. They were inside. The interior of the Vengeance of Thresh was unlike anything any of them had ever seen. The corridors were tall and narrow, built for a species taller and thinner than humans, lit by a strange blue-white light that made everything look faintly unreal. The air, according to their suit sensors, was breathable but thin, carrying a chemical smell none of them could identify. Move quietly, Ethan whispered, leading the team forward with his weapon drawn but lowered. We're not here to fight. We're here to get in, plant the access device, and get out. They moved through the ship in careful silence, following the path Kip had mapped out from the old cruiser's data records, heading toward what the schematics identified as a secondary systems core, a smaller and less heavily guarded version of the ship's main computer network. Twice they had to duck into side corridors as patrols of tall, armored Skarn soldiers passed by, their footsteps heavy and deliberate on the metal floor. Each time, Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, certain they would be discovered, but each time, the patrols passed without noticing the small group of humans pressed into the shadows. It was in the third corridor that things went wrong. A single Skarn technician, smaller than the soldiers they had avoided and dressed in simpler clothing, turned a corner directly into their path. For one frozen second, human and Skarn stared at each other in mutual shock. Then the technician opened its mouth to make a sound, and Priya moved faster than Ethan had ever seen anyone move, closing the distance and striking the technician down before a single noise could escape. The Skarn crumpled silently to the floor, unconscious but alive. "We need to move, now," Priya said, breathing hard. Someone will notice he's missing eventually. They pressed forward with increased urgency, finally reaching the entrance to the secondary systems core, a wide metal door covered in unfamiliar symbols, guarded by a simple electronic lock that Otto made quick work of using tools adapted from the old cruiser's data. Inside, the systems core was a room filled with humming machinery and softly glowing data panels, more advanced than anything the human empire possessed, yet oddly similar in its basic function to systems they already understood. This is it, Kip said, already moving to connect his portable device to the nearest data terminal. If I can get this hooked in, we'll have a direct line into the flagship systems. Command routes, shield frequencies, even navigation. Ethan stood watch at the door while Kip worked, every second stretching out like an hour. Behind him, he could hear the soft clicking of Otto's tools and the low hum of Kip's device syncing with the alien technology. Almost there, Kip whispered. Just need a few more. An alarm began to blare through the entire ship, deep and resonant, echoing through every corridor. They found the technician, Priya said grimly, weapon raised toward the door. Kip, how much longer? Ethan demanded. 30 seconds, maybe less. Outside the door, they could already hear the heavy footsteps of soldiers responding to the alarm, converging on their position. What happened next would later be told and retold across every corner of the human empire, in official reports, and in the informal stories that spread through fleet mess halls for years afterward. But in that moment, none of it felt like the beginning of a legend. It felt like 11 seconds of pure chaos. The system's core door burst open, and 3 Skarn soldiers filled the entrance, weapons raised. Priya fired first, and Reyes and Tull followed, forcing the soldiers back into the corridor in a storm of return fire that sparked off the metal walls around them. Kip, now or never, Ethan shouted. Got it. Access complete. Fall back to the shuttle. Go, go. The team retreated through a side corridor Otto had identified as a secondary path, fighting a running battle against the growing number of Skarn soldiers responding to the alarm. Ethan found himself firing his weapon more times in those few minutes than he had in his entire career, every shot aimed to slow the enemy rather than kill, buying precious seconds for his team to escape. They reached the maintenance bay just as Pharaoh, warned by the alarm, brought the shuttle around for an emergency pickup. The team scrambled aboard, the last of them, Tull, diving through the closing hatch, as enemy fire scorched the hull behind him. Go, go, go! Ethan shouted, and Pharaoh threw the shuttle into a desperate burst of speed, tearing back out through the maintenance bay opening, just as the flagship's shields began to cycle back into their protective rotation. They made it out with less than 2 seconds to spare. As the shuttle raced back toward the safety of the debris field, alarms still blaring across the massive shape of the Vengeance of Thresh behind them, Ethan allowed himself a single, shaky breath of relief. They had done it. They had boarded the enemy's flagship and survived. But as Kip's device continued downloading data even as they fled, streams of information about the flagship's systems, weaknesses, and command codes pouring into his portable terminal, Ethan realized something that made his heart pound even harder than the firefight had. They had not just gathered information, they had access. Real, working access to the systems of the most powerful warship in the Skarn Dominion. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a plan far more audacious than simply boarding the flagship was already beginning to take shape. A plan that, if it worked, would not just give the human empire information about their enemy. It would give them the vengeance of Thresh itself. They made it back to the Wayfinder just as the first Skarn patrol craft began sweeping through the outer edges of the debris field, alerted by the alarm on the flagship. Dr. Ewan had the medical bay ready the moment they came aboard, though thankfully, nobody on the boarding team had suffered more than minor injuries. Pharaoh guided the ship deeper into the shadow of the old dead cruiser, powering down every non-essential system, and once again, they waited in silence. Ethan sat in the captain's chair, staring at the data now filling every available screen on the bridge. Kip had managed to pull an enormous amount of information in those final desperate seconds before the alarm forced them to retreat. Command protocols, internal security layouts, even fragments of the access codes used to control the flagship's core systems. Captain, Kip said quietly, still scrolling through the data with a mixture of excitement and disbelief, I don't think you understand what we actually have here. Then explain it to me, Ethan said. This isn't just information about the vengeance of Thresh. This is partial access to its command network. If we could get back aboard, with the right sequence, we might actually be able to interface directly with the ship's core systems. Not just observe them, control them. Priya, standing nearby with her arms crossed, looked at Ethan with an expression somewhere between disbelief and dark amusement. Captain, please tell me you are not thinking what I think you're thinking. Ethan looked at the massive shape of the flagship on the display, sitting silently at the center of its shipyard, still unaware of exactly how deep the humans had reached into its systems. That ship is a symbol to the Skarn, a warning to every species that dares oppose them. What if we could take that symbol away? You want to steal an entire flagship, Priya said flatly, with a crew of 11 and a badly damaged scout ship. I want to try, Ethan corrected. Now, because if it works, it doesn't just give the Empire information about the Skarn. It ends this war a lot faster than another 11 years of silence and sudden strikes. Nobody on the bridge spoke for a long moment. Then Otto, who had been quiet through most of the conversation, finally spoke. Captain, even if we somehow got access to their systems again, that ship has a crew of thousands. We can't fight our way through an army. We're not going to fight them, Ethan said, an idea sharpening in his mind, even as he spoke it aloud. We're going to make them fight themselves. The plan that formed over the next several hours was even more dangerous than the first boarding mission, but it built directly on what they had already learned. According to the data Kip had pulled, the vengeance of Thresh was still in the final stages of construction, its crew a mix of soldiers, engineers, and shipbuilders, rather than a fully trained battle crew. More importantly, the ship's internal security systems, while advanced, were controlled through a central network that Kip believed he could manipulate, using the access codes they had already stolen. If I can get back into that system's core, Kip explained, or even access it remotely from close enough range, I might be able to trigger a cascade failure in their internal security, lock down blast doors in the wrong sections, cut power to certain areas, even release atmosphere in isolated compartments. Not enough to destroy the ship, but enough to create chaos. Enough to force most of the crew to evacuate to escape pods while emergency systems try to sort out what's happening. And in the middle of that chaos, Ethan said, a boarding team moves straight for the bridge and takes control of the ship directly. That is an enormous number of things that need to go right, Priya said, though her tone had shifted from disbelief to something more like grim calculation. She was, Ethan realized, actually starting to consider it seriously. It is, Ethan agreed. But every one of those things is something we've already proven we can do. We got aboard once. We got access to their systems once. We got out once. We just need to do it all again, one more time, and do it well enough to hold the bridge until the chaos dies down. Dr. Yuen, listening from the doorway, spoke up for the first time. And what happens to my patients, and to Pharaoh, and to everyone left on this ship, if this plan fails? Ethan met her eyes directly. If it fails, Pharaoh gets everyone out, and back to the border, with everything we've already gathered. That data alone is worth this entire mission 10 times over. Nobody dies for nothing, even if the rest of the plan falls apart. The doctor studied him for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. Then I suppose we'd better make sure it doesn't fall apart. They struck 2 days later, timing their approach to the next shield rotation cycle Kip had identified in the flagship systems. This time, the boarding team was smaller, just Ethan, Priya, and Otto, while Kip remained aboard the Wayfinder, ready to trigger the security cascade the moment the team signaled they were in position near the bridge. The shuttle slipped through the maintenance bay opening exactly as it had before, the timing now familiar enough that Pharaoh guided them through with barely a scratch against the hull. Inside, the ship felt different this time, filled with the ordinary sounds of a crew going about their duties, unaware of the small group of humans moving carefully through their corridors once again. They moved faster this time, following the most direct route toward the bridge that the stolen schematics could provide, avoiding patrols where they could, and slipping past isolated crew members where they could not. Twice more they were forced to subdue Skarn crew members who stumbled into their path, leaving them unconscious, but unharmed in maintenance closets and empty corridors. Finally, they reached a service corridor that ran directly beneath the ship's command bridge, exactly as the data had promised. In position, Ethan whispered into his comm. On the Wayfinder, Kip's voice came back immediately, tight with concentration. Copy that, Captain. Initiating cascade sequence now. For a moment, nothing happened, and Ethan's heart sank, fearing the plan had already failed. Then, all at once, the ship shuddered, as dozens of systems began failing, in careful, orchestrated sequence. Blast doors slammed shut, in random sections. Lights flickered and died in entire corridors. A distant alarm began wailing, warning of atmospheric loss, in a section that, according to Kip's calculations, was actually completely sealed and safe. But the ship's automated systems did not know that. Chaos erupted throughout the Vengeance of Thresh. Crew members abandoned their posts, rushing toward emergency stations and escape pods, believing the ship itself was failing beneath them. In the confusion, Ethan led Priya and Otto up through the service corridor and directly into the lower levels of the command bridge. The bridge crew, distracted by the flood of emergency alerts flashing across every console, did not notice the three humans until it was too late. Priya moved first, striking down the nearest officer before he could raise an alarm. Otto disabled a second at a nearby console. Ethan, moving toward the central command chair where the ship's captain, a tall, imposing Skarn officer with dark, intelligent eyes, was already turning to face the intrusion, raised his weapon. "Don't," Ethan said, though he doubted the alien understood the word. The universal translator built into his suit activated a half-second later, projecting the word in the harsh, clicking language of the Skarn. The Skarn captain stared at him for a long moment, weighing the situation with obvious calculation. Then, slowly, the alien raised its hands away from the console. What followed was not a clean victory. Skarn security forces, realizing something was deeply wrong, fought their way toward the bridge for nearly 20 minutes, while Otto worked frantically to lock them out of the command systems entirely, using the access codes Kip had already stolen to seal every door leading toward the bridge. Priya held the final approach corridor alone for almost 5 minutes, using a fallen Skarn weapon to hold back a squad of soldiers until Otto finally managed to seal the last blast door between them. By the time the ship finally fell silent, the fighting done, Ethan stood in the center of the bridge of the Vengeance of Thresh, breathing hard, surrounded by unfamiliar controls and the watchful, hostile eyes of the captured Skarn captain. It took Otto another 4 hours to fully secure control of the ship's core systems, isolating the remaining crew in sealed sections, while establishing full command authority over engines, weapons, and navigation. By the time he finished, most of the flagship's crew, cut off from the bridge and uncertain what was happening, had begun surrendering in small groups, choosing captivity over an unclear and dangerous fight against an enemy they did not understand. Ethan stood at the center of the bridge, looking out at the massive shipyard through the flagship's main viewport, and felt the weight of what they had just done settle over him. They had not just gathered information. They had not just survived a dangerous mission. They had taken the single greatest symbol of Skarn military power directly out from under their enemy's nose. "Captain," Otto's voice came through, tired but triumphant. "Engines are online. Navigation systems are ours. We can move this ship whenever you're ready." Ethan looked at the captured Skarn captain, still watching him with those sharp, calculating eyes, and felt no triumph in the alien's defeat, only a strange, quiet respect for an enemy who had, until a few hours ago, believed his ship to be untouchable. "Set a course for the border," Ethan said. "Let's take this ship home." The journey back to human empire space took 9 days, the massive flagship moving slowly through territory it had once ruled, without challenge, now guided by a small crew of humans who barely understood half its systems, alongside a handful of surrendered Skarn engineers, who, faced with the reality of their situation, chose cooperation over further conflict. When the Vengeance of Thresh finally crossed back into human empire territory, escorted by 3 human patrol ships that had been sent to investigate the impossible sensor readings of a massive Skarn vessel approaching the border, the news spread through the fleet faster than any message could officially travel. Admiral Voss himself came aboard when the flagship finally docked at the Empire's central shipyard, walking through corridors built for a taller, thinner species, staring up at technology that no human had ever seen this closely before. He found Ethan on the bridge, standing in the same spot where he had first taken command of the enemy's greatest warship, looking tired but steady. "Captain Cole," Voss said, his gravelly voice softer than Ethan had ever heard it. You were given 30 days to gather information and return quietly. Yes, sir, Ethan said. I apologize for exceeding the scope of the mission. For the first time since Ethan had known him, Admiral Voss allowed himself a small, genuine smile. I don't think anyone in this empire is going to complain about that particular mistake, Captain. Behind them, through the massive viewport of the flagship's bridge, the lights of the human empire's central shipyard glittered against the dark, and news of what the youngest captain in the fleet had done was already spreading to every corner of human space. A story that would be told and retold for years to come, of a small ship, a young captain, and an impossible mission that ended not with information, but with the enemy's own flagship flying proudly under a new flag. The war was far from over. The Skarn Dominion would not simply accept the loss of their greatest symbol without response, and difficult days still lay ahead for the human empire. But for the first time in 11 years of silent, one-sided conflict, humanity had proven something the Skarn had never expected. They were not simply prey to be hunted in the dark. They were a threat worth fearing. And it had all started with one young captain who refused to turn back.